everybody, and welcome to AI People. Today, we're talking to Chris Latimer, who is the founder and CEO at Vectorize, which is a RAG as a service platform. Welcome, Chris.
Hey, Ben, thanks for having me.
So we always kick off the podcast in the same way, which is by asking you to make a few predictions about the AI industry. And I know people love to make predictions about AI, but it's interesting, I think, just to get kind of the thoughts of leaders on some of these topics. So the first question is, how do you see humans and AI collaborating with regards to work in 5 years' time and in 15 years' time?
So in the 5-year time, I think what we're likely to see is that agents are going to take over a lot of the more menial tasks, the tedious tasks that humans don't want to do. And that's going to drive a number of changes throughout the way that applications get built, the way that we think about data, the way we think about business intelligence. And in particular, if we think about today, the application ecosystem, it's all geared towards humans as the user. And as agents become a bigger part of that and take over more capabilities, then that will shift. And a lot of those applications become unnecessary. But what will be necessary is that we will need better ways to track what agents are doing, how good the quality is of the output. And that's going to lead to a bunch of new markets and new acceleration within existing markets. Looking out 15 years is much, who knows?
Yeah, difficult. Yeah.
I always say the logical conclusion of AI is the complete and total collapse of society, where AI does everything and we don't do anything, and then none of us have any jobs or any money. But then that also leads to the collapse of companies, because who's going to buy things? So I'm banking on there being some escape hatch that we figure out as a society to prevent that from happening. But that's my dystopian prediction for where we are in 15 years, and hopefully I'm completely wrong.
Is the dystopian one just 15 years away? I'm regretting that mortgage we took out.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to see. Maybe we'll have AI agents that'll do the work for us, and we'll get paid for it.
And with, like, you're talking about kind of the kind of rise of agents, even in a 5-year time frame, like where does the human sit in that? Are we just managers of vast sums of agents kind of doing the task for us, or what kind of work are we going to be doing then?
I think that's aggressive in the 5-year time frame. The way that I see things progressing is that I believe most enterprises are going to go through a bit of a metamorphosis. In the near term, the way that I see that all coming together is that if you are the most technical people in a company, you'll be fine. And if you are among the least technical but the most business savvy, you'll be fine. And what I mean by that is that tools like Lovable and Bolt and Replit and these rapid application development frameworks and products and platforms that are driven by agentic AI will now empower a lot of those people who we would say they're technical enough to be dangerous, but you would never hand them over the keys to your GitHub repo. Will now be enabled to go build the things that they want. And that will be driven largely because there's just too much of a cost savings and an opportunity to do that, but also because it will cut down on the perpetual problem that we've always seen of misalignment between business and IT. Yep. And I think that's an important stepping stone that's probably 12 to 18 months away before that becomes the norm. Now, the most technical people, those are the ones that I think will be designing the actual agentic systems, the things that will automate and replace big chunks of business capabilities. And the way that I envision humans interacting with those systems will be both as a supervisory perspective, where you'll look at the outputs of the AI agents and how well they're performing, and we won't need as many humans. The humans who are involved will often be there for escalations when the agent goes not necessarily off the rails, but when the agent just it hits a problem that's a little bit too high stakes for a computer to decide on its own without at least a human looking at it. And as well
Or the
as,
edge cases, yeah.
yeah, places where there are escalations. And that's where that's how I see those interactions coming together in the medium term.
Yeah, okay, so we need to kind of upskill ourselves in one direction or the other and not get left in the middle, I guess.
Right. I wouldn't. We'll have legacy code for quite a while, so I just wouldn't want to be. I wouldn't encourage anybody that is coming out of school, for example, to go learn React and how to build basic web applications. I don't see that being the career path that it once was. They'll either go very deep technical and become somebody who can build out very complex agentic systems, more of the super AI engineer that has the data science background and the coding chops to be able to build complex systems, or really hone in on the business processes, understand the bigger picture of how business works. What are we actually trying to accomplish? Where are the inefficiencies? Because one prediction is that I don't hold, but I hear quite a bit, is that, well, we're not going to have any developers in 5 years. But when I look at the systems and tools that are becoming more commonplace now, it lowers the bar to being a developer so much. I think we're going to have 10x the number of developers that we have now, and they're just going to look a lot different than what we have today when you go to a typical IT organization. And they're going to be made up primarily of people who have that business acumen, are able to look and say, how can I improve this business process and make things more efficient, or allow this team to work more efficiently? And those folks will be empowered with this new generation of application platforms to just go build them themselves. And we'll have to go through a bunch of growing pains there, because we've heard this story before. We've heard this story every 3 to 5 years, if you've been in IT long enough, where a new low code, no code tool comes out and it promises that business users can develop applications. And they've all had the same problem, where the day one experience is great. They can build the apps, and then the apps become unmaintainable. They get thrown over to IT. IT has to deal with that. And I wouldn't say that there's a 0% probability that that could happen here as well. But I'm a little bit more optimistic that this time feels different. This time, the big difference to me is that these tools developers want to use. Developers are happy to use Cursor. They play around with Bolt and they are wowed by the capabilities. I think those agents will get better and solve those problems, but it won't necessarily be an entirely smooth road. We'll hit some bumps along the way.
Yeah, which I guess is kind of natural in any evolution of a new technology, isn't it? So next prediction, I'm going to ask the kind of AGI question, and you can define that however you wish, but do you think that's something that's getting closer, or are we still 20, 30 perpetual years away?
I don't have a concrete prediction for how far away we are. Certainly there are some claims that it already exists, and it's just not out in the wild quite yet. I haven't seen any evidence of that. Now, I think when you say, it's a pretty important question, because you have general intelligence, which in a way we're almost already there. LLMs are more capable than a lot of people at answering
across a range of topics,
across a range of topics. And then the next thing is, well, are we talking about super intelligence? And it would be great. It would be great if that's here sooner rather than later, and we can get all sorts of breakthroughs. But with how fast things are progressing, I wouldn't be surprised. Like, nothing would surprise me at this point. It wouldn't surprise me if we're sitting here next year and we have LLM, super LLMs that are doing drug discovery and coming up with new molecules and figuring out things that would take us a long time to figure out. And it wouldn't surprise me if we reach a plateau, which often happens with technology, where you get the initial things grow really rapidly at first, and then it gets harder and harder and harder to squeeze out that incremental improvement over time. And there's no reason in my mind to believe that this is just a runaway train, but time will tell.
It could be, yeah. And obviously the AI industry loves a kind of a hot piece of news and something new for everyone to get excited about. What's caught your attention over the last week or two?
The Perplexity, what do they call it? Perplexity Labs that just came out. They just announced. I'll tell you.
I haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, Perplexity Labs. It seems to be the intersection between agentic AI, deep research. I've been playing around with it the last couple of days, and it's been pretty fun to leverage. It essentially has a series of templates, and so you can give it some input there in terms of whether you want to build a presentation or you want to build reports or whatever. And that's been a lot of fun to play around with, just personally. The other thing that's been pretty interesting, totally outside the part of AI that I spend my time thinking about, has been all the AI actors that have all of a sudden popped up between the Google models and there was another one that just came out this week that's been pretty entertaining to see what creative people have been able to put together using these models on Twitter and other places.
These like video kind of actors, or
yeah, video actors, actors selling their likeness to AI models, things like that.
Okay, yeah.
And then seeing people kind of combine those with musical AI platforms like Suno, and then these platforms that are doing more video production, but with pre-made actors, if you will, recreatable actors that can act in commercials, can act in little shorts. I think we're going to see an explosion of social content that's all AI generated, which will be entertaining and potentially horrifying at the same time.
Yeah, it'll be entertaining for a while and then get quite irritating fairly quickly, I suppose. So before we jump in to talk about Vectorize, could you just give us an introduction to yourself? So kind of interested in your background growing up, what got you into coding in the first place, and what kind of led you to becoming a founder?
Yeah, I lucked out in a number of ways. I grew up in the middle of a cornfield in Ohio back in the 80s, and computers weren't a thing. They were something that on the evening news growing up, you would hear about this information superhighway that was going to come out. Nobody had a computer. I was fortunate. My dad, who grew up a blue collar worker, just also lucked out and got a job at Digital Equipment Corporation, which if you're a millennial or younger, you probably have never heard of Digital, but they used to be a major player in the computer space. The founder of Digital was famous for saying he thought that the global market for computers was maybe 5, which turned out to be a little off. But that afforded me the ability to actually get hands-on with computers early on. They would go through. I remember inheriting, when the office got all 486 Intel chip computers, they were giving away all the 386. And one of the best things that ever happened to me was having a computer that was slightly behind and underpowered compared to everything else that was out there, because nothing would run. And it became this forcing function to say, well, now I've got to learn, at the time DOS, all about memory management and how I can configure this computer to do the things that I want it to do. And that was a big learning experience for me. So that's how I got into computers. It started off by copying programs out of a book that we ordered, BASIC, and so I was programming from a very young age.
You had to be incredibly accurate with typing sort of thousands of letters perfectly.
Yeah, exactly. When you have no concept of syntax and you're just typing things in verbatim. Eventually a little bit of that stuck. And the second time that I got really lucky is that I was a year out of high school, and I was at Ohio State. I got a job at Nationwide Insurance in their mailroom, And the first Web.1 tech bubble was in full swing. You couldn't find tech workers. Y2K was coming up, and there was such demand for tech workers. They plucked me out of the mailroom and gave me a job as a programmer and paid for my school. And so I was going to Ohio State studying electrical engineering, computer engineering in the afternoons and evenings, and then working at Nationwide as a programmer during the day. And again, that just was really fortunate. That's how I came up. I ended up going through the ranks there, becoming a senior engineer, and then an architect, and then eventually jumped over to tech companies. Went to a company called Apogee. We got acquired by Google. I spent about 4 years at Google building out API management platforms there before getting into the data space at DataStax. And that's where I got introduced to vector databases. And as ChatGPT became much more common and ubiquitous, I learned a lot of these techniques around agentic AI just by helping people that were running into problems with my agent's not working right. I'm not getting the right data that it needs to solve these problems. And that eventually turned into Vectorize, which is our platform for agentic data, for helping agents get the data that it needs to solve the task that it's trying to solve.
Yeah, so the problem you first kind of encountered when you were with DataStax, and then the ideas to kind of start to formulate to build something yourself to solve these problems.
Yeah, exactly.
So do you want to jump into Vectorize and just give us an overview in kind of plain terms, like what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I like to think of Vectorize as the agentic AI data platform. And the problem that we're solving is that most agents need a combination of operational data and knowledge in order to solve whatever task it is that they're trying to solve. And what we do is we try to connect all of your unstructured data sources and not just put those into a vector database, but to give you both a semi-structured and a structured representation. So what I mean by that is, say you have, in fact, we have a customer that was trying to do this. They had a number of data sheets. They're a semiconductor company, and they wanted to serve their distributors. They wanted to serve electrical engineers that were coming in asking questions about chips. And if you go across these data sheets, you have a lot of things that are similar across different types. They all talk about power. They all talk about what voltage they take, their operating temperatures. And what we're able to do at Vectorize is say, let's build an agentic view of this, where the agent may want to retrieve data based on a specific part, or the agent may want to retrieve data based on a specific component type, like op amps or comparators, or all the different electrical engineering chips that are out there. And that's what we do. So we build out this agentic data platform on top of your unstructured data, and we keep everything fresh. So if you have things that are changing all the time, documents on Google Drive, or connecting into a SaaS platform like Intercom, for example, we have folks using us for automating support with AI agents, and you want to make sure that the agent always has the most up-to-date information. We keep that all in sync for you, and your agent just gets a nice clean layer that it can use to retrieve the data that it needs to be able to accomplish its goal.
Yeah, and that's one of the quite unique things about Vectorize, isn't it? That real-time sync.
Yeah, the real-time sync and the way we think about metadata and the way we structure the data. So it's not just plain old semantic search where we say, hey, find something similar, but we let you really curate that data layer so that your agent's able to look across the functions that it has and pull back exactly what it needs. One of the problems that you see with agents all the time is that as they get more complex, eventually they reach a point where they're overly complex. The agent's going to break down, your prompts are too long. And it's the same thing that you'll see if you're in a ChatGPT conversation and you've talked to ChatGPT for too long. It just starts getting confused. That same confusion will happen if you throw 100 different metadata filters in one semantic search endpoint to your agent. It's going to try to do all sorts of weird things to get the data that it needs. And so by using Vectorize, what we can do is we can say, well, we know the agent needs to search for data by these 3 or 4 or 5 ways, and we'll give it these functions that are more descriptive: search by manufacturer, search by part type, search by component number. And the agent then, it has a much easier decision in terms of how it's going to fetch the data that it wants to fetch. And we just provide that layer for you so that you don't have to do any of that curation. You don't have to worry about any of the data processing, the ETL process for your unstructured data. And what you get at the end is just a nice, clean data layer that your agents can use.
So who do you see the platform being primarily aimed at? Is it kind of data engineers, developers, ML teams, or all of the above?
Yeah, I'd say the emerging persona is what I would call an AI engineer, where you have folks that are coming from different backgrounds into this role. So you see some folks that are coming from data science backgrounds, and there's always been this disconnect between data scientists that are building out models and data engineers who will take the raw data and process it to get the form that the model needs. And the same problem exists here. So if you have folks that are becoming an AI engineer from that background, they're not data engineers and they just want a clean way of getting the data. Likewise, application developers that are moving into this AI engineering world, building more conversational AIs and automations and workflows and things of that nature. Again, sometimes they're using code, sometimes they're using low code, no code tools. And again, they don't want to spend a bunch of time on data engineering because the data engineering problem, especially when you're dealing with vector data, has some complexities that people aren't expecting. Like, for example, if you're doing traditional data engineering and I'm taking data from my Oracle and I'm putting it in my Snowflake, I know at point A over in Oracle, my data looks like this. It's got these columns, the columns have these data types, and I know that when I push it into Snowflake, I want it to look like this other way, this transformed way, and it should have these columns and it should be called these things and it should look like this. And I can very deterministically know if my pipeline is performing the way that I want because I can just write a test to see if it looks the way that I want. Whereas when you're dealing with vector data, you know at the end you're going to get a vector, and you know at the beginning you typically have some kind of unstructured data, but you have this very non-deterministic path on, from end to end, where you get a vector into the database, you don't know if that's going to work well with your LLM. So we try to make it easy for anybody, even data engineers, to come and say, I know that I want to get a search index that's going to perform well, that's going to allow my agent to get the data that it needs. And we automate that whole process from optimization of your chunking strategy, your embedding model, all the things that go into these AI data pipelines, to make sure that when you do query your data, it's going to come back and give you accurate, reliable results.
And how is that fully automated, like in terms of kind of structuring the unstructured data, or is there, how much of a service element is there, for bigger companies, for example?
Yeah, I'd say it's about 95% automated. There's some, we provide some tools that give you more control over your initial evaluation and optimization. So we have something called RAG evaluations, which are a way for you to take a sample of your unstructured data, so a few documents, for example, and then we'll generate a synthetic benchmark for that, figure out which of the embedding model combination chunking strategies worked best for you, and then give you the output. And it could turn out that none of those worked particularly well, and you might want to do that a few times. And that's where there's a bit of manual analysis that you can do, and that just gives you control over trying the different settings that you want to set. And then after that, it's completely automated. So you go create your pipeline, and then from that point on, Vectorize will look for changes. It'll find any changes to your documents. It'll structure the data that you want. It'll do the metadata extraction based on a schema for the different doc types. It'll classify your documents. So if you're dealing with, for example, in the legal space, we have a lot of companies that are dealing with the same types of documents over and over again. I've got a non-disclosure agreement. I've got a statement of work. I have a bill of materials. I have a master service agreement. And here are the things that I really care about inside of these documents. We can classify docs when we see those in the pipeline. You can define the schema and tell us things that you care about, and then we'll pull that out, and then that becomes part of that agentic layer that I was describing. If you want to say just search my non-disclosure agreements, or just search non-disclosure agreements with this party, it allows the agent to really hone in on just the pieces of data that it wants or it needs, so that it can precisely make a determination and give you the output that you want it to give.
Like you mentioned, been working with a client in the legal industry there. Are you seeing certain types of industries or certain types of companies that are kind of using your platform more than others? Are you noticing any patterns there?
A lot of companies that have the most unstructured data So legal companies, legal tech companies are a big one. Financial documents are a big one. And then within companies, there are certain functions. So legal, general counsel within big companies, vendor management, any place where you have a lot of unstructured data, or where you need knowledge, you need the knowledge aspect. So for example, in health insurance, when you're dealing with insurance policies and you call up your insurance company and say, I need a procedure done, how much is it going to cost? And that can vary widely depending on the nature of your policy and what the entitlements are. This is a very US thing. This maybe, you may not understand what I'm saying based on UK insurance, but here that's a big problem. And those are places where you need very precise retrieval out of your unstructured data if you want to give an accurate answer, which is, as you can imagine, very important when you're dealing with some of the life and death type situations you can deal with in insurance.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously, like, the implications of getting anything wrong there are going to be very costly. There's a lot of focus at the moment in the industry on kind of LLM ops, and people are talking less about kind of classical ML pipelines. Do you think that gap is getting wider, or is it closing?
I think it's getting wider. I don't know that it will always stay wider. You can try to use an LLM for a recommendation model, if you want to, and it will give you back some recommendations. It will likely not be as accurate, and it will likely end up costing more than a traditional model would. But a lot of organizations are somewhat struggling to figure out what to do with the data science functions that they have grown over the past decade, at a time when the whole role of these teams were to build out custom models for fraud detection, for recommendations, for an e-commerce, for example. And in this new world of LLMs, that seems to be much less important. Everyone is using foundational models. No Fortune 500 company is out there for more than a science project saying, we want to be in the model business. We want to leverage the foundational models. Maybe there's a little fine tuning, but for the foreseeable future, I think it's all going to be agentic AI is going to be where the investment and the growth in enterprise AI is happening. And I don't see a lot of widespread demand for more traditional models that are doing recommendations, fraud detection, those type of things.
Okay. So thinking about some of the kind of broader trends in AI overall, like what do you think it is the most kind of underserved part of the AI tech stack? What are the people that you talking to? What are they struggling with that there's kind of not many tools out there to help them with?
None. That is not the thing that people are struggling with, is that there are too many tools, that there's just too much.
So knowing what to use, yeah.
Knowing what to use. There are too many things, there's too much noise, there's too much hype. The claims that are being made are exaggerated. The people are just suffering from AI fatigue, and there's that, like, we started this conversation talking about how fast this is moving. You didn't ask me to start off, what have you seen in the last 6 months? You said, what have you seen in the last week? And that's because every week there's just something new, and it's impossible to keep up with. And that seems to be the universal challenge that we all face. I mean, I face it in my whole, like, I'm trying to build a company in the AI space, and even I can't keep up with it. So how can you expect your average CTO or chief data officer or executive or senior manager in a financial services company or healthcare company to deal with everything they have to deal with, plus stay on top of all this? And that's where there's just a lot of I don't want to call it confusion, but it's just a lot of struggles, because knowing what's real and what's not, and you don't have time to spend digging deep into all these things, is just a universal struggle at this point.
And what area of AI are you kind of most excited about at the moment? Like where do you think like the biggest developments are still to come that we haven't untouched or touched on yet?
We are just getting started with agents. That to me is the that's the technology that we're like, we haven't even scratched the surface yet on that. We're still building things that are very rudimentary. And when you see technologies like Cursor and Bolt, we're getting our first glimpse of what agentic processing can look like. When you look at Perplexity, you're getting some glimpses of what agents are going to look like. That's the technology that is going to change everything about the way we work, in my opinion. And that's where I think most of the enterprise spend is going to be. That's where most of the enterprise focus is going to be, is on what can I automate? How do I get accurate results out of my agents? And how can I keep up with the demand? Because my backlog for things that I'd like to automate, I'd like all my employees to be 10x more efficient, but I don't have the resources to do that. So how am I going to prioritize this? And where do I think that we can actually move the needle, versus some of these projects are going to be a 2-year boondoggle that's not going to deliver results. So balancing out the achievability with the potential value creation will be an ongoing challenge in prioritization, the decision that organizations are going to have to spend a lot of time thinking about.
And thinking about like your experience of building a company in the AI space, like you've raised capital from some kind of top tier investors. What kind of helped you stand out? Did you already have relationships with these people, and kind of you had the right idea to bring to them, or was it a tough process and you had to go through a lot of work to find those investors?
I was fortunate to have a good network of. I wasn't directly connected, but I was connected to people who had very strong networks in the investor space. Uh, anytime you are trying to get a company off the ground, it's almost always a matter of you're going to need help along the way, and having advocates for you, having people that are on your side is just I can't I can't overstate how important that is, and also just how appreciative I am for all the people that have helped us along the way. The thing that really helped us, and I would say anybody else that's looking for funding or thinking about doing a startup in their career, is understanding product founder fit and founder market fit. And we could sit here and talk about how big of a market opportunity it would be to go mine space asteroids, but and I don't know your background, maybe you're more qualified than I am at that, but I would be a terrible founder. I would be a terrible selection, founder selection to go do that, because they're just such poor founder market fit. So the thing that I had going for me and my co-founder is that we had spent the last 3.5 years or so, first off, working closely with people who are building AI applications, and we really
natural journey,
the data challenges that they had, and then likewise we had experience building out cloud platforms at scale, doing enterprise selling, and given that we were already a little bit on our way with the product, we met with a lot of investors, and we met with some great investors. We met with some that just we weren't usually not a good fit. And we were fortunate enough to work with True Ventures, who's just been a great fund, as well as Dig Ventures out of the UK, which has also just been incredibly helpful, not just with the capital they've given us, but also just the support and resources. And again, finding that right fit between you as a founder and the investors you want to work with is absolutely critical as well.
And then finding kind of product market fit, was that kind of a smooth process, that vision in your head, like you had from the kind of problem at DataStax, or was there kind of, big surprises along the way? How did that work?
Yeah, it's never as smooth as you think it's going to be. Yeah, when I would, another piece of advice I'd have for anybody that's thinking about starting a company is focus on distribution first. Before you write a line of code, go out and see if anybody wants to buy what you're about to build. people are willing to have conversations with you. People like to give input, especially when you don't actually have anything to sell them. Their defenses are down a little bit.
Yeah.
So the things we learned, we hadn't fully anticipated just how much pull we were going to get from the picking a term here, you could call them vibe coders, you could call them AI engineers, but they really are that new emerging persona that is coming from a business background. They're not that technical. So we started off optimizing for very enterprise requirements, and we thought we don't need a vector database on our platform because all the enterprises are going to want to have their own. They're going to want to own that data, and we really focused in on enterprise use cases. And the enterprises early on, changing now, but early on they were just so much in the POC prototyping phase. They were trying to figure out how to get something in production, what to get into production, and they weren't serious about it at the time. They weren't urgent to get something into production. Versus a lot of the initial demand we had was coming from individual developers, like smallish AI studios with maybe 20, 30 people that were coming and saying, I've got a client and they really want to automate the way that they interpret contracts, or I've got the individual wealth manager at a big financial services company who wants to use AI to generate investment reports and analysis for their clients, and I need to deliver this in the next 2 weeks. I don't want to spin up a vector database. I don't want to manage this stuff. I just want an easy solution that's going to work for my client. And so we pivoted and added some things on there that we weren't anticipating, and that's helped drive a lot of our initial traction and popularity of the platform.
Because you have a self-serve model, as well as obviously, as you mentioned, working with enterprise companies as well. How do you think about kind of product-led growth, community building, sales-led growth? Is it kind of a balance, or are you trying to lean more heavily into one than the other?
When we started, we wanted to focus on product-led because we know the space is moving quickly, and we weren't the first mover in the space, but we were a fast follower, and we wanted to build out as big of a community as we can. And we had a few goals for doing that, but we knew that part of that involved getting individual developers hands-on with the product through a free tier, and then having stepping stones to let them grow and keeping their costs manageable while they did. So that was our initial focus. And the other part to that was, unless you have a very strong network, and not that we don't, but unless you have a very strong network of enterprise decision makers who can decide to transact with you early on based on the fact that they know you and like you and trust you, you need to have some proof points. And it's easier to get proof points with smaller companies and individual developers who are trying to solve something. So our initial focus was to say, let's get as many successful projects into production as we can, and that way, as we're learning and we're building, and we would have never built out the agentic capabilities that we did if we weren't making these customers successful. Now, as we double down on our enterprise focus, and we are going out and talking to more enterprises, that becomes extremely valuable because it puts us in a position of being able to give advice that's informed, and we've seen things that go wrong, and we know what goes wrong, and so we can come in and add value early in the process. And for enterprises that want it and are looking for it, we can become that trusted advisor to say, hey, we've seen similar projects. Here's what went wrong. Here's what to watch out for. Here are the gotchas that you might not be thinking about. And that just builds trust. And then that trust ultimately gives us the opportunity to serve them in bigger, more meaningful ways.
Yeah, great stuff. Well, it's been great having you on today, Chris. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best place to reach you? Like, where do you live? Are you on LinkedIn, email? Where's the best place to reach you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is probably the easiest way. If you the Chris Latimer, all one word. I think the LinkedIn URL is linkedin.com/n/Chris Latimer. all one word. You can also reach me directly on email, which is chris@vectorize.io. And we'd be happy to hear from anybody in your audience that's building out AI solutions and AI agents and needs a great data platform to make them work well.
Great stuff. Well, thank you for your time, and thank you to everybody watching, and stay tuned for the next episode of AI People coming soon.